Hey, good morning, good morning. Happy Monday morning to you. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And we are continuing our study of the Olivet Discourse. We are focused now on Matthew 25, 31 to 46, and the prediction of the gathering of all nations at the time of the judgment. Now, let me make something very, very clear. I don't know if anybody really, honestly, that's going to disagree with the statement, but it's one of those type of statements, one of those statements of truth that we just need to make to refresh our memory, so to speak, of what we're dealing with. This time of the judgment is the time of the harvest, right? I don't think anybody has any problem with that. Now, I'm going to be discussing what that means. And in a previous video, I was discussing this concept of Sukkot. Well, I'm going to have a lot to say about Sukkot in an upcoming video. But just the reminder, Matthew 25, 31 and following is the time of the harvest. Now, in tomorrow's video, I'm going to be sharing with you how Matthew 13 and Jesus' parable of the coming of the Son of Man at the end of the age to send forth his angels to reap the harvest is directly parallel to Matthew 25, 31 and following, and proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was fulfilled in AD 70. So you don't want to miss tomorrow's program. Okay, in the meantime, I've been sharing with you a bunch of parallels between Matthew 25, 31 and following and Joel chapters 2 and 3. Now, in Joel chapter 2, 28 and following, we have the statement, "It shall come to pass afterwards," which Peter in Acts chapter 2 translates as, renders as, gives as, "It shall come to pass in the last days." So we have a temporal context for the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, for the giving of the signs and wonders in heaven above, on earth beneath, before the coming of the great and the terrible day of the Lord. In chapter 3, which, remember, there were no chapter divisions in the ancient Hebrew Masoretic text, no chapter divisions in the Septuagint. Okay? So chapter 3, verse 1 says, "And it shall come to pass in those days." Well, in what days? The last days. "And at that time." Well, what at that time? Well, the antecedent reference is the great and the terrible day of the Lord. Because the Holy Spirit was to be poured out as a sign of the coming of the great and terrible day of the Lord in the last days. And in those days, and at that time, the Lord was said, "I will gather all nations to judgment." Well, again, we are in the realm of Hebraic expression. And Greg Keener, by the way, in his massive commentary set, 4-volume set on the book of Acts, comments on this kind of language being so typical of Hebraic hyperbole. And by the way, that is the one I've got on my desk here is volume 2, Acts chapter 3, verse 1 to 14, and chapter 2, verse 8. Massive, massive work, full of historical, full of linguistic insights, some really good stuff. So anyway, Greg Kinger points out how Peter, inciting the language of Joel 2 and 3, is using the typical Hebraic hyperbole. Now, we ought to think about that. Is it Joel's intention? Was it the Spirit's intention to say that every single nation on earth at some imaginary end of time would be literally, physically gathered geographically? Or is this use of this hyperbolic language being used metaphorically, graphically, dramatically, to point to the importance of what was actually going to take place geographically, historically? Well, all of that said, I want to come down to Joel chapter 3 and verse 12. Let the nations be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I will sit to judge all the surrounding nations. Put in the sickle. Pardon me. For the harvest is ripe. Come down, for the winepress is full. The vats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Now look, if you have a center column reference, and no, the center column references are not inspired. I understand that. But virtually every single center column reference that you're going to find, and even those center column references are not inspired, they were created by men who have a vast knowledge of the scriptures and the intertextuality of allusions and echoes. Doesn't mean they're right in every single occurrence. But the center column reference here for verse 13 is Revelation 14. And in this, they are absolutely correct. So, what does Revelation chapter 14 talk about? Well, in Revelation chapter 14, in verse 6 and following, John said, I saw a great angel flying through the midst of heaven, proclaiming the everlasting gospel of Christ to every nation, kindred, tongue, and tribe, saying, Babylon is fallen. Babylon is fallen. The hour of her judgment has come. By the way, I've just got to take note of this. Here is the Father who knew the day and the hour of the coming of the Lord, revealing to John, revealing to his Son, who would reveal to John, who would reveal to the churches the hour of his judgment, the Lord's judgment, on Babylon has come. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for all those people who say and appeal to Matthew chapter 24, verse 36, but of that day and hour knows no man, no, not the angels, but the Father only. Well, okay, that's fine. Here is John writing before the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, and yes, that's when he was writing, and the Father tells the angel to declare, for his Son to reveal, for John to share, the hour of the judgment had arrived. Matthew 24:36 is answered and defined and described and delineated right here in Revelation chapter 14. And it's the judgment of what? The judgment of Babylon, which is the city where the Lord was crucified, and that's only one city in all of the world, in all of history. And you know that's true. Okay, gotta hurry here. So Revelation chapter 14, we are in the context of the judgment of Old Covenant Jerusalem. Revelation 14:14. I looked and behold a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man. Who is that, do you suppose? Oh, well, obviously we know who that is, don't we? Having on his head a golden crown, in his hand a sharp sickle, and another angel came out of the temple crying with a loud voice, saying to him who sat on the cloud, Thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come, for the earth is ripe. If you don't see a direct citation of Joel 3, you're not looking. Joel 3 was predictive of the last days and the coming of the great and the terrible day of the Lord. Revelation is obviously about the last days. And it's about the great day of the Lord against Babylon, none other than Old Covenant Jerusalem. Joel is about the last days, harvest at the day of the Lord. Revelation 14 is about the last days, harvest at the day of the Lord. Where's the dichotomy? Where's the division? Where's the distinction? There is none. There is none. And since Revelation is undeniably about the impending, at hand, last hour judgment of Old Covenant Jerusalem, that means that the gathering of the nations of Joel 3, of Matthew 25:31 and following, of Revelation 14, was to occur at the time of the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. That means that Matthew chapter 25:31 is not part of a discussion of the end of time. It means, therefore, that the Olivet Discourse is not divided into two subjects, i.e., the fall of Jerusalem and the judgment of that time at the coming of the Lord on the clouds of heaven by the Son of Man, versus a coming of the Son of Man at the so-called imaginary, non-existent end of time. And of course, we've got more. And as I said, on tomorrow's program, we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 13 and the time of the harvest and Matthew chapter 25. Great stuff. In the meantime, do not forget, for the rest of January 2021, 2022, U.S. orders only, go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, order $25 or more of material, okay? You'll get a 15% discount. Actually, our calculator has been messing up royally, and it's been giving some of you 22 to 25% plus free shipping. That's not the greatest calculator in the world, but hey, you know, we've been honoring. So, take advantage of the offer. Save yourself some serious money, $25 or more, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. You will really, really be glad of taking advantage on some wonderful material and special discounts. Okay, I'll see you on the flip side.